seems everyone who has ever visited the Santa Monica Pier has a story to tell. Having spent over 25 years on the pier, I have certainly heard my share. Some stories resonate more than others, of course. Some are tales of great drama surrounding important events in the pier's history, and some simply transport you to a unique and wonderful era that you wish you had experienced. I'm Jim Harris, Deputy Director of the Santa Monica Pier Corporation, yet perhaps better known as the Pier Historian. I've had the great benefit of hearing the most fascinating stories about our beloved pier, and I'm taking this opportunity to share those stories, told in person with you. One of the perils of building a pier out over the ocean is, of course, the ocean. Violent storms have proven to be the worst nemesis for piers, and the winter of 1983 brought that fury to the Santa Monica Pier. With us today are Linda Sullivan and Judith Meister, both of whom were at the pier during its most frightening time. Linda, Judith, thank you for joining me today. Can you please, each of you, define what your roles were with the city and in particular with the pier in the early 1980s? Linda?
I was Public Information Officer for the City of Santa Monica. I was hired, I think, in the spring of 1981. So I was there when the first storm came at the end of January. And then, of course, through the subsequent storm, through the reconstruction, and eventually the reopening.
Judith?
And I had just completed doing a special project in 1982 for the city. And I was just about to start work as a senior administrative analyst with the General Services Department when the first storm hit on January 27th, and the city manager decided to send me down and see what was happening in terms of the damage and what we were going to do initially. And so I quickly assumed the role of Pier Reconstruction manager, and I had located myself in a trailer out at the end of the pier and was just, we were just starting to deal with the first storm when the second storm, the really big storm, hit on March 1st. And I was, I think that one of the things about the pier is that you really don't understand it unless you're actually there and work there, or some people have lived there, but it's a very, it's far from City Hall. And that whole day of March 1st, when the waves were just really churning and the rain started and we knew something was really about to happen, and we would call up City Hall, but they didn't quite get it. You had to really experience what was happening on the pier, and it was really scary. It was very scary.
Sure. Now,
you had to feel it move.
Yeah. Now, prior to all of this, in the decade before, the 70s, the pier had been saved by the community from demolition. And so the pier was already sort of going through some changes.
Well, we had just gotten a $1 million grant.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I did a press conference where we announced it. Ruth Galante, I think, was instrumental in getting it for us. Ruth Galante was on the LA City Council, but she used to be chair of the California Coastal Commission. I think she was the first chair of the Coastal Commission. So I believe they had neighborhood groups, more than a dozen, maybe more than 24 neighborhood groups that participated in a charrette to plan what everyone wanted to see in terms of the improvements on the pier. So everybody kind of knew where we wanted to go. We just didn't quite understand that there would be this whole center part that we'd have to fill in.
Right.
Well, then along in 1982 and the winter of 1982, 1983, it was an El Nino year, so it was anticipated that there would be storms rolling in. Were there any preparations made to secure the pier prior to those storms?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that the first storm really caught folks off guard, and understanding how fragile the pier structure could actually be. I mean, it was a timber pier and old, and probably there were a lot of wear and tear on the pier over the years, and I don't think anyone really had understood how the force of the ocean could really damage the pier.
Sure.
And but after the first storm, the city acted very quickly to do a cleanup and to assess the damage, and Healy Tibbitt's crane was out on the pier. And there wasn't a lot of time. It was a month really in between the two storms. And so that big crane was there, and that day, we knew that the crane needed to be moved further back, and it's a big process to move a crane on a pier. You have to lay out things for it to slide over, and so they did move it back, I think, about 50 feet, but by then the rain had really started, and they needed to shut down the pier and evacuate everyone, which we did by late afternoon.
Okay.
And so, there were some precautions taken.
Now, going back to that January 27th storm, the first of the two storms, and there were reported to be 10-foot seas coming in, and it was pretty well known how big that storm was going to be. And the lower fishing deck on the west end was only 8 feet above mean high tide line. So obviously something was going to give, and in the community, I've heard stories that the community was on top of the Palisades ready to watch and braving the sleet and the wind to watch the pier give way. The pier must have been closed to the public, in anticipation for that.
The pier was closed to the public, but after the first storm, the council members were running all over it. As public information officer, I would follow them out and take pictures of them, and they were great photo ops, I have to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So that started my photography career.
Okay, so you were at the pier on the 27th?
Yes, and subsequently between the 27th and March 1st, because all the council members, they all wanted to go out, and they were told not to go on the lower deck, and of course they were members of the council, and they didn't, who was going to stop them?
Well, sure.
And so, it was just, I don't think anyone really, even though there had been a disaster, I don't really think anyone appreciated how precarious things were, because they didn't live on the pier. They didn't know how stable the pier was supposed to be on a day-to-day basis. And so the fact that it was constantly moving under your feet seemed like, oh, well. Then.
So being there during that first storm, was it pretty frightening, or was it, that the city was just being precautious and closing the pier, and it was okay for the city council to go out, but was there any fear for your own safety?
Oh, no. I didn't feel any fear for my own safety. No. I don't think anybody acted like they really felt any sense of something worse could happen. Sure. The worst had happened.
Sure.
We might lose the lower deck. That was kind of the general consensus.
Right. And that is all that we did lose after that first storm. And then, Judith, as you mentioned, the second storm, city manager John Alschuler immediately said, we will rebuild, and so a crane was taken out, and the crew began cleaning up.
Right, that was the plan, and we started the FEMA process because we needed to do the damage assessment. But when the March 1st storm came, and it was terrifying, actually. So I was on the pier all day until we were sent home. And then, as I said, I was out. I had a little office in this trailer, which was next to Moby's dock, and on the Newcomb Pier. And that night, I got a call from the city manager's office. I think it was about 9 or 10, and they said, come down because we want you to go and get your files out of the trailer just in case. And so the police escorted me out. I was, had rain gear and all kinds of things, and it was, it was really scary. It was really scary. And I got my things, my whatever files I thought we needed to retrieve out of the trailer, and then we got off the pier, and then we spent the night in the city manager's office because, we knew what was happening and that the pier was going down.
And there were no people allowed out at the end of the pier? No council members went out during this?
No. After the second storm, no, they were still on the pier, I seem to recall, but I may be confabulating the two time periods. I remember going out in the little rubber Zodiac and they would wrap my camera in plastic, and they lowered it down into the Zodiac. And then after I had shot pictures from the ocean looking up, I remember changing in your trailer because I was soaked through. I mean, it was, I was very cold, but it was the most fun I ever had to this day at work.
Ah.
So I...
And so, just to reiterate, the crane. I want to go back to the crane because I love the crane story and the warning that the pier maintenance staff at the time gave to the construction crew. You'd better get this crane off of the pier. Yeah. And it was late in the afternoon, close to quitting time, and they moved it 50 feet.
Right. Yeah. David Pan was the pier maintenance supervisor at that time, who was just an amazing man, and knew every single inch of the pier. And yeah, I remember he was like, we got to get this crane off, but they got it back as far as they could.
And sure enough, that crane went in the water,
right,
and acted as the first battering ram to take out all of that square footage of the pier, a third of the entire pier.
Right. Yeah, we lost 400 feet off the end, and then there was a big 37,000 square feet chunk off the Newcomb Pier. That was a result, I think, of everything being battered.
Right. And the pier didn't resemble anything to what it had previously been.
No.
Just devastating.
I mean, and the interesting thing is, right before that, the council had appointed the Pier Task Force, and as Linda said, there was a big process of coming up with the pier guidelines, and there was a great activity looking forward about really doing some things to improve the pier, and they had just had the charrette for Carousel Park.
Sure.
And which happened right before the storms, and
well,
so I think that it was probably very good that had happened, because there was so much feeling about that. Of course, the pier would be saved, and of course, the pier would be rebuilt. That there was never a question. I don't believe there was ever a question in anyone's mind.
Sure. Well, let's talk some more about that in a minute. We're going to take a break. It's amazing what the pier had gone through, and we'll talk about what the aftermath of the storm when we return.
Welcome to the Santa Monica Pier. My name is Mary Pat Cooney, and I'm here today to offer you a walking tour of the pier, sharing with you all the stories that I can remember of its 100-year history.
Scandals, there's fishing, there's surfing, there's boats, there's police. It's a slice of American life on the pier.
And we're back with Linda Sullivan and Judith Meister. And we've been talking about the devastation of two storms in the winter of 1983, one in late January and one in early March, which devastated the pier, destroyed a third of the entire square footage of the pier, and the pier was left not resembling much of a pier at all. However, there's a silver lining, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later. But I know, Linda, you mentioned that you were out on a Zodiac, and it was a wonderful adventure to be on this Zodiac in the ocean taking pictures. But I know that you also took aerial photos of the devastation.
That was an adventure, but it was a little bit of stark terror at the time. The city manager had asked me if I could get some of the photos that KTLA had shot of the pier from their airplane or from their helicopter, and no, they weren't going to give us their film, and they weren't. It was a different generation, and you couldn't just get a still photo off a piece of film without going into a great deal of problems. So the city manager had wanted to get rid of the police plane, which was a Cessna 172, And so I knew about the plane, and I said, why don't we have me go up in the plane and I'll take our own photos and then they'll belong to us. And he said, oh, that's a good idea. He called the police sergeant who was the pilot, and he said, you two go up in the plane. So I went to the airport and I went up in the plane, and I realized the minute the plane took off that I was terrified and that we were there was nothing holding us up. And I thought, but I can't show my terror because then everyone at work will laugh at me. So then we got up there and started circling around, and he said, well, make sure your camera is secure, because when it comes time to shoot, you just open the window and stick your head out. And I had a Nikon, I think it was an FM, with a motor drive, and it was heavy, and I had the big thing around my neck, and it must have weighed 4 or 5 pounds, and I thought, oh God, now I know, but I already had bit back my fear. And I stuck my head out the window and looked through the camera lens, and all the fear went away, and I just I didn't care anymore, and I loved it. And the minute we touched down, I said, Bill, I want to go again. This was great. And so that was it. I had the flying bug after that.
Do you still fly today?
And I don't. Flying takes time to be good at, and it's expensive, and owning a plane, which I did with partners, was expensive. And so no, I don't.
But what a fun hobby for a while.
It was a lot of fun.
And if it hadn't been for those storms.
And that's what got me started on it. And actually I went to work at the airport, I don't know, a couple of years later. They transferred me.
Mm-hmm. Now those storms, another benefit of those storms, of course, as I mentioned, there was a silver lining, and you'd already alluded to it. There were already plans for reimagining the pier leading up to the years prior to the storm. And if you could tell me a little bit more about the Pier Task Force that was working on those and how the storm made it easier. Judith, would you like to?
Sure. Well, as I said, the council appointed the task force, I think it was in '81, and so it was made up of some folks who had been involved in saving the pier back in the '70s, as well as some architects. My husband was, Paul Sullivan was on it, and I think that's how he first got involved in a lot of city affairs. But, and as Linda said, Ruth Galante was with the Coastal Conservancy after she had left the Coastal Commission, and there was a grant, and Jim Burns, who was probably one of the first people to do workshops, really established the whole beginning of the public workshops that the city's done for many, many years. And that's what happened. They got a lot of people together, and the decision was that the pier should stay the pier. It should stay a good, low-cost and moderate recreation and area. And certainly there was no interest in getting a master lessee like in Redondo Beach, or to do any major gentrification. And I think that was a clear message which continued as we realized that we needed to rebuild the pier and what was going to happen. We spent a lot of time thinking about the pier's future right after the storms, and there was a big May 10th staff report which really talked about the future and the creation of the Pier Restoration Corporation and how we would go about rebuilding the pier. So that all kind of grew out of the pier guidelines and the Pier Task Force.
And the amusement park, which is the pier's,
right.
It's what the pier is known for today, was part of this process as well?
Right. Well, I believe the pier guidelines talked about really having a family amusement area around the carousel.
The fun zone.
Which we did. We had, and that happened in the late 80s and the 90s. We had the fun zone. But the idea was really to create a family amusement area, which now has become Pacific Park. It's down a little bit further away from the carousel, but that was really definitely always in the plan.
Yeah, I think the fact that all these workshops had gone before made the process less controversial, because it was clear that the public thought amusement park, yes, hotel, no.
Right.
And so there wasn't a question of a big developer coming along with lots of money and then doing that master lease kind of situation, which normally can be tempting.
And I think a lot of the ideas that were in the guidelines really have come to be, which was really to improve a lot of the businesses that existed, and we've seen that.
Sure.
You know, we've seen businesses make improvements and change their menus, and we've certainly gotten some new businesses and new restaurants. But the idea of the pier being just this beloved place that is timeless, I think that's really important and has remained. And I don't think, as I always say, it's the pier. It's not going to change.
It's a pier that everyone wanted all
right.
along. Now, let's talk about the pier and not so much the businesses on the pier. Now, the pier that was destroyed, the west end that was destroyed, was a wooden pier on top of very old wooden pilings. A lot of those pilings dated back to the 1920s. And it was protected by a breakwater, which created Santa Monica Yacht Harbor. But it was a failing breakwater. But afterwards, there had to be some thought as to how to shore up the pier so it could withstand future storms. And of course, that's I'll let you elaborate on. Judith, would you like to elaborate on?
Sure. I mean, and we spent a lot of time because everyone wanted the pier to essentially feel like a wooden pier. However, we knew that without rebuilding the breakwater, and that was something we really explored and tried to work with the Army Corps, but we knew that if that was going to happen at all, it was going to be much later. And so we needed to figure out how to build the pier to withstand another 100-year storm. And so the decision was made to use concrete piles and a concrete substructure with a wooden deck. And that was done at the far end. The portions of the pier that were still in the surf area, we reinforced the wooden piles, and those have just over the past couple of years been replaced because the wooden piles are not strong enough. But there was, the process to rebuild the pier took a long time, and part of it was figuring this out and figuring out the best way to do it, and then we did it in stages. So also to get the funding to do it was done in stages.
Now, Linda, you were public information officer, and when the pier was destroyed prior to the reconstruction, the years before the reconstruction, there had to be a conception that the pier was closed, if not permanently, at least for a long time. But that wasn't the case, and there were efforts made to make the public aware that the pier was still open.
Okay, well, I left the city in, I guess, the late 80s, but I was still, living in Santa Monica and doing special events, things like that. And I was put on the Pier Restoration Corporation. So it's important to recognize that the pier is a fabulous passive recreational area for people, just to walk on the pier and just to spend some time. And your kids would love to be on the pier and in the ocean air. And so that kept the pier going. People still wanted to go there. When I got on the pier board, we kind of helped the pier get their act together in terms of the advantages of commercial filming and how not to drive the tenants crazy while you're doing it. And so the pier had a chance to gradually make their changes, which I think always helps if change can be, if you can sort of work into change and it can go a little bit smoother because it's not so abrupt. Sure. So a lot of the people that were on the pier before the storms remained on the pier. I think the plaster barrels.
Oh, barrels,
took
plaster
a
shaft.
while before it was gone. There was a a playland area.
Right.
Yes, there was.
Yeah,
And,
there's still the arcade.
Yeah, and there was there were the bumper
Right.
cars. I remember when the
In the
bumper cars apparently had to be taken away because they had to rebuild the pier, and so but they were going, but they would come back, and so it was. I think it was a good transition,
Yeah.
and of course people always wanted better restaurants. Nobody wanted a lot more bars, but they didn't want to lose the bars we had. So, I think there's, 2 or 3 alcohol outlets on the pier. Not that many, not a great number for the amount of businesses and square footage you have. So I think ultimately
It all made the pier
it
better.
all
Right.
it all made
Yeah.
sense, and I'm happy to learn that finally we have another nightclub there. And
Right.
I know in my 14 years on the pier board, we kept going through businesses that didn't quite make it
Sure.
through the transition.
Well, thank you. Thank both of you for joining me today. It's amazing to think that something so awful and devastating and frightening as a storm could have a silver lining that would help to speed things along for the pier as we enjoy it today. And it's really been special.
Pier is a silver lining.
The pier is a silver lining. Thank you again, and thank you for joining me. And please do join me again for more Santa Monica Pier stories.